Hello, everyone. I'm Rekha. Happy Friday, and I promise this is going to be fun. We'll make it as conversational, as lively as it can. So, before we jump into the actual panel, would love to introduce everyone here. Uh, I'm going to be the moderator for the session. Bit about me. I currently head product teams at Taco Bell, and I'm now looking forward to this session. Today, joining me from the right, we have Chin. He is the head of architecture at Gap, leading the AI ML vision. Followed by that, we have Ellen. Ellen heads the AI ML teams at Adobe. And finally, last but not the least, we have Chandra. Chandra leads the AI ML strategy at JP Morgan Chase. So with that said, let's get into the session. So why are we even here today, right? Like, we want to talk about the barriers, right, with the AI implementation at our organization, and how do we overcome that? But even before we jump there, I think my question to our panelist is, what does AI implementation mean to you and your organization? So I would love to start with Ellen to talk about his perspectives around it.
Yeah, thanks, Rekha, and hi everyone. Hopefully you're not feeling very sleepy. Hopefully this session will energize you. So it's really exciting to be here. And I'll start with answering the question by framing it in terms of what AI means in the context of Adobe and in the context of the work that we are doing. The view is it's an enabler, and it is something that can help you build differentiating solutions. From the view of an enabler and a differentiator, when you think about building ML-powered services, scale is one of the key challenges that comes to the forefront with respect to implementation. Then time to market is another one. I'll talk about these things later, but overall, scale, time to market, and feedback loops become very central. And also, when you build these ML services, another thing in implementation is when you build core technologies that are powered by ML, it could be even like the personalization services that Girija talked, right? Any one of these becomes part of your core technology, then they live for a long time. They're not going to go away in a year or so. It lives for like 5+ years or even more. Then how do you actually handle the long tail of inputs? How do you actually deploy them in different kind of environments, on the edge, on the mobile, or on the web and stuff like that? And again, how do you actually evolve them? AI is advancing in such a rapid pace. Just keeping up with the latest advances and updating these models in itself is a big challenge. And adding to this is like organizationally, how mature is your ML practices? Things like ML ops, and are you able to like monitor your models and data in production? All those things, probably I'm listing out a lot of stuff, many of you know, but all these things are front and center for AI implementation for us.
Oh, thanks, Ellen. I think you touched upon an interesting aspect of ML ops, right? Like how obviously AI is becoming that differentiator and enabler for a lot of organizations. Would love to hear Chin's kind of perspective around this. I know he has a lot of interest in that space, so would love to hear his thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely, and really great to be here actually, and I get a chance to meet some of you offline, online. For us as an organization, as we go through the modernization journey, I think we've been through this for a couple of years now. The focus is and has always been to think about it, how do we leverage technology and basically to unlock the intended business outcome. I think that's pretty important, definitely for Gap. I think most of other retailers as well, is we don't just bring in technology for the sake of technology. Really, how do we kind of relate that to the business value, the outcome we want to achieve, and things along the line. In terms of the analytics journey, based on my observation, is we're going through the phases of, a few years back, we do it at the fleet level. Think of it as like national average, what is the right behavior for certain analytics capability. And we specialize into localized, right? What I mean by localized is groups of stores, ideally that particular store and whatnot. And now we are at a very early stage of what we call personalization and scale. So as you can imagine, the challenge becomes harder and harder, right? In the olden days, you just have big data and you do average, and that should be good to go. But as you kind of go closer and closer to personalization, the online behavior and whatnot, the infrastructure to kind of support that becomes very, very challenging. So, so scale, when we think from that angle, we also need to think about what does it mean to scale? How do we bring ourselves out to think about, how do we go into a consistent model to do things consistently across the organization? This is the reason why we embark into a journey like MLOps journey. The idea really is to figure out what is the platform component, the commonality, the infrastructure and capabilities that we can leverage and use in a federated sense. So not every single product teams and whatnot need to figure out all the nitty-gritty details of how to productionalize the MLOps and things along that journey.
Oh, thank you, Chang. I actually loved what he said, right? Like, looking at MLOps and how we are shaping our products in our organization to kind of unlock those business outcomes. Chandra, tell us about it. What does that mean to you and your organization? I know, you come with a lot of that fintech experience and stuff. Would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, definitely. And well, fintech is new to me, but before that, I was in consumer electronics, and these are my opinions. So primarily, like when we talk about AI, I think the first thing that comes to why I want to implement is because they are giving the state of the art on any available data set or any available problem that we are looking at. You look at the literature today, and there are no questions that deep learning technology are pushing the boundaries and the envelope in case of spoken language understanding, natural language understanding, or even computer vision. And as my co-panelist mentioned, AI services and system is really a combination of the data pipeline, well-established training infrastructure, whether it's on the cloud, whether it's embedded, and when we talk about embedded, whether it's through federated learning or through on-device learning. And all of these require a pretty good, solid ML operation system. And at the center of that sits your AI model. So it's really 1% innovation and 99% perspiration. So that's what AI means to me. Iterate at a really rapid pace. The iteration would come through data, more strong infrastructure, and once in a while we also get good modeling technologies.
Thank you, Chandra. So I think to summarize, right, I think we are hearing hey, it's being a differentiator, enabler, unlocking the business value, ML ops. Coming to the crux of the session, right, what obstacles, right, what are the challenges and kind of the barriers that one sees that comes along with it? So I would love to start with Chandra, kind of talking through some of the challenges from his experience.
Well, there can be really a long laundry list around it, right? The AI challenges about it. But let me start with the first one. Really, the challenge that most of us are failing or falling into is hiring, right? AI is being adopted at an extremely rapid pace. And with that, vis-a-vis, we are also having a shortage of the right talent that understands the problem to take it to scale. The other good example is around the product health, right? The product health in sense, how do we, the full AI system is composed of different components, from data to the pipelines and the other. So for example, in speech recognition, you need to have a data pipeline. You need to have a speech that converts it into text, and then you need to make some information out of that text. And each of them have their own compartmentalized metrics. How do we connect them and to our leadership show that we are hill climbing on a certain metric, we are making day-to-day improvements. And then once you do that, right, how do you explain it? Explainability of AI is a big buzzword, but here is my thing. At one extreme, when you're able to explain something, it's deterministic. And machine learning or AI is probabilistic. How do we combine the two ends together? That's another one. And all of you are going to to me that if I don't talk about data, then that's a big problem. Of course, data is really a big problem. These machine learned models are really hungry around data. And sometimes the data is freely available. You go through Wikipedia, try to pull data. But if you go into the health sector or other sectors where there is personally identified problem, the data becomes scarce. Of course, we don't want those companies to be left behind in terms of AI adoption. So how do we solve these problems? So these are some general challenges that I feel are there in the AI adoption.
No, great insights, Chandra. I think product health hiring, data. I think all of us probably here today now are dealing with that. No, I would love to kind of double click further on the data and would love to ask you, Chin, what are your challenges? What obstacles do you see?
I'm crazy passionate about data, actually, even though I talk about ML ops. I'm kind of curious, actually, raise of hand, how many of amongst the audience where you have the dream of building the data lake, only one for the entire organization, and and it usually relates to something fuzzy that say it doesn't work, the quality wasn't there. Any one of you have that kind of issues? No, wow. Okay, I'm alone. That's awesome. That's basically what at least I observe in my career journey is some of the organizations I've been through, we oftentimes talks about building the data lake, the data strategies and whatnot. And it oftentimes ended up with really almost like a repository that is unvalidated, whether it's quality and whatnot. It's almost like a junkyard, quite frankly. I'm not sure whether I should say that on stage, but it's usually pretty not usable. It's done by centralized BI team, bring it in, and it becomes somebody else's problem, whether to curate it, quality, and so on and so forth. So one of that is definitely our challenge. And one thing that we, at the end of the day, when I started to dig a little bit deep, and it was about 3-4 years ago now, been a while, but when I started to dig a little bit deeper, there's actually 3 common fundamental observation or challenges that I've seen. And the starting point definitely is the integration challenges. So for retail space, we have so many teams, product teams, whatever you name it, each of them do their own thing, right? Whether it's integration, operational system, and so on and so forth. It's not really true that you have these stabilized warehouses and you just need to ingest or pull it into one ecosystem. Oftentimes, a lot of these things are microservices and whatnot, very chatty, very collaborative. So the other one that I noticed, and when it talks about quality, what does data quality means is the most fundamental root cause that I observe is actually related to people who produce the data, and what I mean by people is system. The team that does that doesn't have accountability on even simple things like schema and integrity of the data they produce and publish. And this is especially prevalent in the microservices land. And to relate to that, the third point is the governance around, like I mentioned earlier, roles and responsibility of producer. Oftentimes you will go to the BI team, but quite frankly, BI team is not responsible if the data doesn't come from them. They are kind of like a middle person that kind of bring in the data from different people to produce those data and so on. So we did face these 3 key fundamental challenges, and we try to address them head on. That does require a really large organizational alignment, enterprise alignment, to kind of make sure that all of us are heading towards the same direction.
Thank you, Chin. I think very, very important perspectives here, right? Like the data quality issues. Sometimes in the big picture, we forget that, but I think very crucial for any organization. Ellen, tell us about it, right? I think what's kind of the challenges and what's your perspective around it? Like when we say, hey, these are the obstacles, these are the challenges. In my experience, I've seen.
Yeah. So you've heard a lot about data, so I'm going to provide a slightly different perspective in terms of, and the context is at Adobe we are building these ML-powered document experiences, for example. And of course, we also have data problem. And Shin talked about a lot of ways you can go about in trying to kind of get good, clean data. There is another dimension is using every user interaction to actually collect data. That could be labels for your training set. It could be users' interaction with your system, providing you more information to help you with it. And there are holes. So this is an interesting direction because it allows you to pretty much get label data for free, in the sense it scales with your system. Like every time you drive your Tesla, you are generating millions of data points. And every time you turn your wheel, you're generating labels for whether it is the right turn or not. Like that, you just kind of can get a lot of label data. This could provide a direction where we could sidestep some of the data problems, but it comes with its own suite of questions, like the data is very noisy. How do you actually build experiences that allow you to quickly gather this data from every user interaction? All the privacy concerns that come into picture if the user is interacting with, let's say, a very sensitive document. And can you actually do it in a privacy-preserving way? Can you anonymize and still actually use it in a meaningful way for ML learning? Those are a suite of challenges. I will add it in top of the other data challenges. It's a very interesting space. Outside of the data challenges, there are the other challenge that you start facing is when you're building ML services that power products that lives in multiple surfaces, like in a desktop, in a web, and in mobile. Being able to optimize your model and be able to run on those edges is a challenge in itself. If you take any of the modern ML models that are like maybe transformer based or foundation model kind of paradigm, they're really big. Try to optimize them to put it on a mobile device is a challenge in itself. And we face that when we think about making this. There are interesting trade-offs there. If we can run the entire ML model on the mobile device, then all the data is stored locally. It's really privacy preserving. But just doing that itself is like a challenge. The third challenge, I'll take a minute to add that and then I'll pass it over to you, is time to pretty much for all ML services or products, the first time user uses it and you get feedback is when you really know whether that is working or not. All the data, synthetic data are on your evaluation set or like other sets you evaluated on are not that revealing. The time to that first feedback, optimizing that, for example, if you could go from an idea to having that in the hands of user in say a week to month, that would be really amazing. But there are a whole suite of challenges that come into play for that. And even after you get that, then scaling it to 100% of your user population is another dimension of challenges. I'll stop there. I'll pass
Thank you,
Yes.
Ellen. I think what this kinds of tells us is the problem is real, right? And each one of us have different perspectives to it, whether it's hiring, whether it's a cost aspect, whether it's the data, the nitty-gritties inside that, whether it's an operational element. So as we acknowledge, yes, we have the problem. So how do we overcome this, right? Especially in a world where there is always competing priorities, and sometimes we are said like, hey, go do this, and you have less to do, versus sometimes you have a lot and you don't know how do you kind of go about addressing this. So I would like to start asking this question from Ellen, like, is there a framework that you would like to share with us today? That could tell us like, hey, how do you go and prioritize? Like we are acknowledging, hey, this is a true problem. But how do I prioritize this? Any insights to that?
So I listed out a long list of challenges, but it's not all gloom and doom at all. It's very exciting, and lot of enterprises and companies and industries are leveraging AI to build a lot of user value, real user value delivered, and features that could not have been done before without AI. So with that in perspective, the kind of framework that we use is based on essentially optimized for iterating fast. The more you can iterate fast, the more you can gather feedback, the more you can validate your hypothesis. So broadly, even without AI, the principle of iterate fast, fail early, fail fast, that is kind of the broader philosophy for this framework. And the framework in itself is basically take a fairly scientific approach in terms of forming your product and technology feasibility hypothesis early on. Start with the use case, form hypothesis, then actually build a model, ship it, get real feedback from users, get real feedback on real data, and use that to actually guide the next steps in terms of think of this as your alpha, how do you want to go from there to the next step, or just maybe your evidence points at pivoting from there and formulating the problem differently or going to a different user value. So that is one framework we use to validate the hypotheses and use that to inform how to kind of prioritize which one is the most promising and which one is not. The second thing is also to kind of embrace failures as the reality. So taking a portfolio approach, like if you're using ML to build enabling technologies, build 10 and view your success and failure at the portfolio level, as in like out of 10, probably 5 will succeed. It's still a good ROI on your investment. As compared to if you pick one big ML project and just desperately want to make that successful, that's going to be really, really hard. So those are the two things that's kind of helping us. We are also learning and trying out various things, but a portfolio approach to kind of look at the ROI and to be able to actually iterate really fast and optimize for that and learn and like kind of use that evidence that you learn from the experiments to inform you which one to prioritize. And of course, once you've found a good fit for a use case, then there is the journey of actually building and shipping it and scaling. But at the early stage, this is the framework.
No, thank you, Ellen. I'm enjoying it. It's all about hypothesis and experimentation coming from a product perspective. Chandra, no, I would like to ask you, like, no, hey, how do you go about this, right? Like, is there a framework that you suggest that could help us scale? Considering there are like so many problems and like sometimes we think like, oh, which one to go behind, right? So how would you approach it?
Yeah, definitely, like one thing what we need to acknowledge about machine learning and AI is that its penetration into the market is fairly new. Like if you think about 2010 is when speech recognition systems started. To 2015, it started getting into computer vision. So that's a bit of history. If you compare with automobile and other things, it's pretty short-lived. So we are having lots and lots of challenges around there. So how do we succeed here? Like I'll quote from one of the plenary talk that my professor gave. Is standing on the shoulders of giants. So what does the giant mean over here? So there's a lot of dedicated effort from multiple research units and multiple companies about making any of these models publicly available. Now, if we are working in the area of NLP, natural language processing and understanding, BERT should be, many of us would be aware of that. Now, a lot of customization to the specific use case or a specific problem is on top of pre-trained BERT models. If we talk about speech, there is a wave two-way. So there's a lot of efforts that are going on in this area where we can leverage a lot of research that takes in account publicly available data that we can customize to our needs. So that is one direction, definitely, a lot of enterprise sector can benefit that have shortage of data and so on. The other one is, as Ellen mentioned, it's really, really important that we have developer efficiency. Back, I think 20 years back when I was training neural networks, there were no GPUs, and it took 4 weeks to train a very tiny neural network model, right? Today we are talking about 500 billion parameters. So it's very important that our training capabilities are much faster through distributed training architecture, because it's a hit and trial, not just in case of enterprise solutions or what we are doing. It's also a hit and trial in terms of these models, how good they are going to perform. So you really want to give the ability to your engineers and researchers to get to, as we call in the cost function, right? Get to the local minima or the global minima much, much faster. So these are some things that, again, emphasis on the infrastructure is really, really critical. And try and use whatever is there publicly available in a sense, right? It's hard to compete with millions of researchers these days and millions of grad students who are working on these topics on day to day, right? let's acknowledge that and take the best that's out there in the open source community.
That's very nice, Chandra, right? And no, just to reiterate, standing on the shoulder of giants, I love that. You need to tell that to your PhD professor. Chin, how about you? Like, would love to hear perspective around this.
Well, they both have really good answer. Like, I'm running out of answer now. I do agree with Ellen from the angle of looking at it from portfolio-based approach and managing it from the trade-offs between value versus effort and whatnot kind of standpoint. Kind of to piggyback on my earlier statement about looking at commonalities, consistency, streamlined approach, I strongly believe in platform-based approach as a strategy to figure out what is this commonality that we can kind of solve, take a few steps back and solve it across the organization. One of the learning, at least I experienced in my own journey at Gap, is we do a lot. Well, one of the side effects when we do portfolio-based approach is we occasionally go into more of a point solution, whether it's buy or build, especially buy. But the side effect of that is you ended up with huge technical debt, huge integration challenges and whatnot. And what I mean by that, oftentimes when you engage with vendors with a lot of buy solutions, usually that integration points are not that flexible and non-negotiable. You cannot just say, hey, everybody use Kafka, otherwise let's not chat, right? So it is a challenge from that angle. It is very important to be very intentional about it. What is the strategy around that? And maybe it is the adaptive strategy that makes sense. The common layers you leverage Kafka as the central nervous systems for the company and whatnot. Those are pretty important to kind of figure it out on the get-go. And then the last thing I think is also very important is to look a little bit from a lens of how we organize ourselves. Oftentimes we find solutions based on how teams are formed and who own whatnot and things along the line. Like, I think one of my colleagues loves to quote Conway's law is, the system architecture is designed around how people work together. Very important to take the reverse set into like, what is the architectural North Star? How should we be looking about it? And then look from a lens of, okay, this is how we organize it. How can we influence the change, whether it's product placement, teams, composition, and whatnot, to fit into the architectural intent that you want to head towards? That would actually definitely save us in the long run in terms of the managing the debt and technical debt directions properly.
Thank you, Chen. I think how we organize ourselves, it's sometimes very simple, but very need of the hour. And it's also kind of a discipline that you bring in, like as you build through products, right? As you think through ethical aspects and stuff. So thank you, Chin, for sharing this. So I know we have another 10 minutes. I have one last question for our amazing panelists. Like, what would be that one recommendation or takeaway that you would love to share with our audience to proactively and boldly engage with AI? Because we all know there is this problem, right? And it's going to be always there. But what would be that one recommendation or a takeaway that you guys would like to share? Chin, I would love to start with you.
Sure. I have a script here, but I'm going to not follow the script. I think for me, one of the things, like a lot of us come with assumptions and experience, whether it's from previous work experience, what we learned from this conference setting and whatnot. I think it's important as you kind of go into each of these different new places, whether it's industries and sectors and whatnot, take the time to actually do some assessment and analysis and validation to understand what are these challenges that, whether it's slowing them down or accelerating them, the understanding of the culture, how people work, how things operate, very important. Because in my mind, the hardest thing, I'm sure many of you have encountered, really is about people, process, organization, and things along the line. So do spend time to get that, figure out who should be the right champion or champions that can partner with you as you kind of try to drive through change across, especially across enterprise from that angle. I do believe in use case-driven approach, quite frankly. I don't think technology should be brought in for the sake of coolness. They are cool, right? Deep learning, everything is really awesome, but it's important to kind of put that from a lens of what is the business value, the business outcome that you want to drive and derive from, and address it from that angle. That definitely will help in the long run.
Ellen.
Awesome. Should I?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you. Actually, my thought is very much along the lines of the last thing that Shin said, but I'm going to start with another PhD joke, like he said. There is a joke among PhD students that you invent a hammer in your PhD, and then the rest of your career you go looking for nails that you can use that hammer on. So, mapping it to my learnings is that don't use AI as a hammer and look for nails, which are projects to which you can apply on. That quite often, in my own experience, have led to failures. So the learning that I would like to share is look at AI as an enabler and differentiator, and start with the clarity on the user value you want to deliver. There is no substitute for strong product thinking. Independent of AI is the technology or something else tomorrow, maybe blockchain is the technology you want to play in. There is no substitute for good product thinking in terms of what is the user value or user problem we are trying to solve, and then try to actually see if AI is the right fit and then use it. There are plenty of use cases around where AI is the right fit, so there is no dearth for it. But starting with AI quite often leads to the pursuit of finding nails with the AI as the hammer. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Chandra.
I think as my co-panelist said, right, like building out the product is a tough task. So I'll kind of assume over here that the product is there and now we are using AI into it and walk that there. So really one of the terms that I go with is iterate and innovate. You might have heard like 3 times I spoke, all the time I'm talking about the fast pace of and a strong machine learning infrastructure. So to give an idea on that, and I'll use some terms like, from neural network training itself. You can do stochastic first order differentiation. It takes less time, but it takes many steps. Or you could try second order Newton's method. It takes more time and less steps. But at the end, you reach the goal the same way. And most often what we have seen that both of these lead to the same results. So the idea here is like if we go a little bit more on the first order stochastic gradient, that means take some small steps towards the goal. It not only helps us, but it also brings in light what are the other issues that we have in the deployment pipeline. It requires like maybe the data is not coming right, but if we are waiting longer, we cannot really tackle the problem. The other one is even when we are deploying these models on the cloud, and even more serious issues when you're trying to deploy these models on the client, there are QA pipelines. And if we do these small things, the overall infrastructure, the flow kind of becomes more streamlined and the factory is running much more efficiently. So I think take small steps towards the right direction. And as you said, like, we may invest a lot on finding the brightest solution, but it takes a lot of time. So that's kind of a work. Iterate and innovate.
Thank you, Chandra. Thank you so much. So with that, I hope you guys enjoyed this session. No, I enjoyed it. I've learned a lot from my panelists out here. Thank you for giving us an opportunity and would love to open it up for any questions that you may have. Yes, please.
So in particular, Chandra, but everyone else can feel free to answer. You were talking about the stochastic gradient, like iterate
Mm-hmm.
years ago. I'm curious, how do you do you have any metrics of how you measure like developer velocity and that sort of thing? Because I mean, it's one thing to talk about like how expensive say GPUs are, but like you have a whole team of data scientists.
Right.
The iteration period is super long. I'm just curious how you like measure that and think about it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So definitely when you have a product, and I said like, let's imagine the product is out, and how do we understand that the product is performing? So usually we have certain metrics around it. In the case of speech recognition, it could be word error rate or, the other things. So what I mean is like once you have established a certain metric, you could hill climb on it and keep improving it. But keep improving them like, small by small by small so that we achieve over there.
Thank you, Chandra.
I just want to add a different perspective. Like if you're thinking about how would you actually measure the velocity or the productivity of a team of machine learning engineers. The other way to look at it is in terms of time-bounded experiments, say like every 2 weeks you have like a kind of a sprint and you do experiments which prove or disprove some hypothesis. Adding this signal to the model is going to get me to that lift in whatever percentage lift that I'm going for. And then to measure how fast you can iterate on those experiments and how fast you can prove or disprove your hypothesis. It does two things. One, it allows you to identify bottlenecks to your iteration, how fast. And second, quite often this iteration speed is a leading indicator as compared to you do like 3 months of work and then you don't land on a good lift that you wanted for your metric. So that's another way to kind of look at it from more engineering perspective.
Thank you, Ellen. Any questions? Yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I think this is a great question, and I think each one of us would have different answers, I think. So I'm happy to go first, and Chin, just like if you, the question is like, how do you, like, do you have an idea of, so because the mic is not there for the question answers, it's hard to hear here, so I'm going to just kind of repeat it, restate it, that's all. So my understanding of the question is, how much time typically does it take to iterate and get some first version out and for the product? And I think given the diversity of our backgrounds and the industry we are in, that would change. I'll first answer it from our experience. It takes anywhere between 6 months to maybe even like 12 to 18 months, depending on what you are iterating on. The North Star that we want to actually go is within a quarter. You start from an idea, then collect the sufficient amount of data that is needed to build a model, then actually build an experience around it, and actually get it to the hands of customers. It's still ML. The thing I want to highlight here is not all of the time is spent on just ML. ML is only a small part. There is a whole lot of engineering that happens when you want to ship an ML in a product, and those, like starting from the user experience to UI to backend services, all the integration with security, they also take time. So all this time is not just purely ML modeling, but ML is a significant part, and a quarter is a good way to look at it when you are in a big organization. If you're in a startup, probably it should be a week, but if you're in a bigger organization where the touch points are like numerous in terms of the various products it touches, a quarter is a good North Star.
I can chime in next on that one. So time frame right on, at least based on observation, it really depends on the analytics capabilities as well. One thing I do observe, and one of the reasons, like we do, you name it, some of them we build ourselves, some of them is hybrid, augmented with vendors, consulting companies, and buy solution. One thing I do observe is it oftentimes started off with algorithm and very focused on the algorithm, chasing after, KPIs and whatnot, you name it, and there's always going to be metrics, which is a good thing. I think that's very important. And it goes through a lot of like cycles and iterations to land on, that. So you go through the POC, and then after that, looks promising, and then you pass the beta and say, hey, engineering, how can you do something about it? And then you open up the aperture, it doesn't work anymore, right? The small data set, especially in retail or fashion retail, the distribution is not that average, if you can imagine, right? So of course it doesn't fit. You kind of have to start on the get-go, the actual real data, big data, and understand the nuances and seasonality and so on and so forth. So that's what we're trying to go after. Is at the end of the day, is we do not want to operate in silo, like there's a handoffs, right? You do kind of your algorithm focus first, and then say, okay, now how do we make an engineering integration and whatnot kind of standpoint. But time frame, right, is correct. Based on observation, about 6 months and beyond is what we're saying. We do want to bring it shorter because at the end of the day, the iteration portion is very important. So when the cycle is super huge, then it kind of become washed out, and people forget what the original intent of the research is about.
Yeah, I wanted to add, to just add a bit of clarity is releasing a new feature is a different thing than updating the feature and improving the quality of an already existing feature. I think the pace at which we want, let's say we have an existing feature out there, the pace at which we want to iterate also depends on the problem. We have a dynamic world, lots of news is coming around, maybe machine learned models around them need to be updated overnight. Or if you want to have a human detector, I think our morphology is not changing every day, so we could have it more static in a way, and then keep improving to that. So I think really actually getting a feature out from a POC is really a difficult problem. But improving the feature, for that we really should aim at, always we have a metric associated to a feature, and we target towards improving it day over day. That's the thing.
I know we are at time, so we'll be around here if anyone has questions. But thank you again. Have a great evening and a lovely weekend. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.